Michael Anderson is a ULI elder and an activist, originally from Gaduga in New South Wales, one of the four men who established Australia's Tent Embassy in Canberra in 1972, 50 years ago. Has been a participant in the Australian Aboriginal Astronomy Project. Michael has collaborated with academic astronomers in sharing and documenting traditional star knowledge. He's been a lecturer in Aboriginal studies, a legal representative, an artist, a professional football player, and a grazier, and is involved in promoting the sovereignty of Indigenous people worldwide. Michael, over to you.
Thank you kindly. And thank you very much. And I acknowledge the traditional owners and the lands on which you may live, and acknowledge and pay respects to their elders past and present, and the future young ones coming forward. So I've looked at a couple of things that you guys have proposed, but as you say, I'll speak about a few things. But let me first address the Aboriginal Embassy. And by the way, thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure always to sort of give other people an insight into what went on back then and what's still going on right now, and to share my thoughts on this. And I have many thoughts, and I've been very much involved right at the core and the heart of a lot of this stuff that's been happening in the past and recently. So in regards to the Aboriginal Embassy was basically a rejection, a protest against Billy McMahon's policy, Billy McMahon's government, a policy which was saying that the federal government would be prepared to lease land to Aborigines, when in fact, the success of the Gurindji walk off and the fact that Aborigines have been very much active all the time trying to stay on their country. And I've experienced listening to my grandmothers and grandfathers being told that how in the 1930s they were forced off the land by police and government policies because they needed job opportunities for non-Aboriginal people, or the swaggies as they were known back in those days, who were walking around looking for jobs during the recession period. And so that culminated in many Aboriginal people who were in New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland who were forcibly removed from the properties by government and police, so that the white farmers couldn't use the Aboriginal people for cheap labour. And so Aboriginal people who were still living on their traditional lands on those properties were removed, and that sort of caused a lot of heartache for a lot of us, and we became the fringe dwellers. Now, growing up in that sort of environment, listening to the old people and learning my stories and learning my culture, certainly put me in good stead to understand what the old people kept talking about, and the grief and the loss that they suffered and indignity of being moved off their country, now being forced to become exiled on other people's country on stock routes on the fringes of towns. And so with that, growing up and then getting into the high school and being educated, I began to understand what this world was all about. And so I accepted the challenge to make a stand, I guess, as a 17, 18-year-old. And so the Aboriginal Embassy, it wasn't intended to be an embassy at the time. It was intended to be just a protest, a vigil of some kind down there in Canberra. The original thought was to squat on the steps of Parliament House, but we thought, no, they'd have some muscular men who'd quickly pick us up and move us off the steps of Parliament House. So anyway, when we got there, it just came up that we called it the Aboriginal Embassy, and which has been written about now quite all over the world and spoken about all over the world as being, some kind of genius sort of plot by the Aborigines to bring attention internationally and nationally to the plight of our people. The Aboriginal Embassy resulted in a great number of things. In fact, after the Whitlam government, we got a promise from the Whitlam government that if we didn't go back, we give the Labor government time to do something about Aboriginal affairs and to make significant changes and address the issues that we wanted addressed. Whitlam was pretty true to his word, but first we had to deal with a pretty belligerent group of people in the McMahon government who were pretty keen on sort of making sure that Aboriginal people did not get to own land and be landowners. And so after the big confrontation we had in July of 1972, which was quite a violent confrontation. I've been in some football bash-ups and football brawls and street brawls in my time, but none like that one at the Aboriginal Embassy at that time. It was quite a rugged, confrontation. But nonetheless, it really brought it home, the home truth, though, and how far we were prepared to defend our beliefs and defend our right to our country and fight for it. We lost a bit of blood, and so too did the opposition. But nonetheless, the story got out, and I think we gained some major achievements. In fact, during the embassy, a lot of people don't realise that the communist regime of the Mao Zedong era had extended an invitation through the Maltese embassy for the Aboriginal Embassy to go to China, and so that was arranged through the Maltese Embassy, and so a delegation of 20 people organised from the embassy went on a trip in 1972 to Communist China. We were the second group of Westerners ever to go into Communist China as a formal political delegation. It was a cultural invite, invite to China as it was known then. And then again in 1973, we sent a second delegation to China in 1973 back because the other one was quite successful. I must admit that one of the key organisers from the embassy, an elder, I asked him why they didn't take me on the 1972 trip and then the 1973 trip. And he said, well, the arrangement was that the government gave us all visas and allowed us to go on the condition that you didn't go to China at all. And so I think they were pretty, they knew exactly what I would be up to had I gone to China in terms of formalising a diplomatic relationship with that country. So yeah, they just made sure that we stuck to a tourist type cultural exchange, basically. But nonetheless, the achievement was quite significant, and in fact, I think we kicked a lot of goals in that time, and so that I think with that invitation, it really showed the serious nature of the Aboriginal Embassy and its impact politically in not just Australia, but alerting the world to a situation that existed in Australia at the time. And of course, a lot of the points that we brought up at the Aboriginal Embassy, a lot of the demands, there were 6 primary ones. And of course, Gough Whitlam addressed many of them when he became Prime Minister. One was the introduction of the Northern Territory Land Rights Act, where they set up the ability to be able to claim land, and so that became very successful, and it influenced the states of New South Wales and South Australia in the 1980s under Dunstan and under the Neville Wran government, where they introduced the 1983 Pinjarra Land Rights Act, which gave the Pinjarra people 8% of the landmass of South Australia under that act and their self-rule. And in New South Wales, we got back something like about 3,000 hectares of land of the old former reserves with the right and they act to claim unused and unoccupied Crown lands. And so that's quite significant. There's still about 27,000 land claims still outstanding from that 1983 onwards that haven't been dealt with by New South Wales. But the point is that there were significant achievements and milestones in that period after the Aboriginal Embassy, and they started dealing with those things. Malcolm Fraser was true to his word and supported a lot of what Gough Whitlam started as well. And so he made sure that he followed through with a lot of the policy objectives of the Whitlam government in relation to Aboriginal affairs and Aboriginal people, which was no mean feat, considering he came from the Liberal coalition government. But he was adamant that he would do it the best he could, given the circumstances. And before the Aboriginal Embassy as well, we really got a lot of things going in terms of becoming self-determining, and those things we really pushed the envelope to be able to get great achievements for our people. And we ended up with legal services, housing companies, medical services, children's services, higher education programs, early childhood programs, which were never thought of earlier. And that were Aboriginal people were driving these objectives, and it really played out very well for us. Since the 1990s, after the sacking of the ATSIC, the Aboriginal Torres Strait Island Commission, Aboriginal affairs just disappeared off the radar, and basically it was up to anybody and everybody, I guess, to try and work out what was going on. And then all of a sudden there was a meeting with the late Queen in 1999 by a delegation of Aboriginal people, and I was in London with Ellie Gilbert at the time. We were doing some research, and one of the things that we realised was that there was a group of Aboriginal people in London meeting with the Queen, and there was an invite there, and they met with the Queen. And it doesn't take Einstein to work out that straight after that meeting, Patrick Dodson was one of them. He was then made responsible, I guess, and funded to develop a reconciliation strategy. And that came from the meeting, I would assume, and I can only assume this, but it's no coincidence that it happened after he met with the Queen at Buckingham Palace at that time, along with Marcy Langton and Lois O'Donoghue and a number of others. And so we were a bit concerned about this, because reconciliation, my meeting with David Hurley, after the Queen had recognised me as the leader of the Yoalio Nation, in correspondence between myself and her on behalf of my people, in 2013. I pursued that, and one of the things I met with David Hurley when he was the Governor of New South Wales. We had a meeting at Government House, and I made it very clear to him that, look, if we're going to talk about reconciliation, my people's proposal is that you help us bury our dead in terms of where they were massacred. We know where the sites are, we know where the bones are, we've actually found them. And I said, if you help us find the people and help us bury the dead, then we will have something to talk about in terms of reconciling your problems with us. And so he took that back to the New South Wales government, and I'm still waiting for a response. And he's now the Governor General, so I'll remind him of that soon in some correspondence that I'm preparing. Now, the issue of, I became the research director of the treaty in 1981 to 1985, and during that time, we were under the Fraser government. We were looking at how you enter into a treaty. And what would that treaty look like? And so the National Aboriginal Conference, who employed me as the research director to develop a framework for a treaty, a national treaty, with the Commonwealth government, they sent me around the world, and I looked at treaties in Canada, England, Alaska, the American models. I looked at Canadian models as well. I went to England and looked at the union, the active union that they did with Ireland, Scotland, and Wales when they became the United Kingdom. I had a look at that because I wanted to see how they integrated their cultural practices, their own individual culture from Ireland, from Scotland, and from Wales, to see how they integrated that with Britain and became a single United Nation called the United Kingdom. So I looked at those matters. I met with members of the Privy Council at this time. I met with government members. I met with different constitutional lawyers in London during this time as well as back home here, meeting with our constitutional lawyers at the Australian National University, New South Wales University, and the like, and looking at models on how this can be constructed. I also, in '83, with Gough Whitlam, we travelled to 5 African nations and had meetings with President William Nyerere of Tanzania. We met with President Mugabe. We met with the President and Vice President in Nigeria. We met with the President of Kenya. We met with Foreign Office of the people in Ethiopia. And when having these meetings, we wanted to look at how they liberated themselves from England. And we know the history of some of those countries because they fought civil wars and a lot of bloodshed was spilt. And so we had to look at those things to see how we could look at a treaty. What would that look like? And so we then understood. I came home and told the people whom I was working for, the National Aboriginal Conference. I said to them, "You guys have to understand that we have to now put a proposal to England, to the Sovereign of England, because after all, Australia still operates under the sovereignty of the Crown of England." And so we needed to put a proposal up to find out what they were prepared to give up in these negotiations to Aboriginal people and forego certain claims in respect to things that they assert that they have rights over in Australia. So there was a lot of that. And one thing that came up was, okay, how do we do this? Because we've got a constitution here in Australia, a Commonwealth constitution, and then we have to deal with the state constitutions, and we had to look at that. And one of the recommendations that came up, or there was 2 options. One was to set up a very simple constitutional proposal, and that was that we alter the words of section 51, subsection 26, and just simply take out the word and make laws for any race for whom it is deemed necessary. And we take those words out and we just insert the words have the power to pass laws for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island race within Australia. And so they're very simple words, but we also added that they could make laws for the benefit Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples. And so it was a very simple statement that could be inserted into that section of the Constitution and take out those words for any race that is deemed necessary. That way, then, where you put the word beneficial in there, or a benefit to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander race, you takes out any question of racism that may emerge, and have the Parliament laws that may be detrimental to the people. And so you avoid that, and that way you overcome also the need to write in there an anti-discriminatory clause in the Constitution. You automatically insert that there. By taking out any race that is deemed necessary, you also take out the racial component of that, which means that they can't pass laws for any other race in Australia. Like, for example, their aim was to stop Kanaks from people living in Australia in the 1930s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and they actually packaged them up and took some of them back home. So they passed those special laws. That's one of the racist elements in that constitution that people want to get rid of. And so by simply taking out the word for any race that is deemed necessary, we get rid of that. And we just simply say they have the power to pass beneficial laws for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. The second option was that we go under Section 105A of the Australian Constitution, where we could list a whole number of things that they could pass laws for in terms of cultural heritage, language preservation, cultural preservation, recognition of Aboriginal right to be self-determining and to make decisions within their own country, to recognise Aboriginal law and culture within the defined areas where the Aboriginal people have their own land laws and laws, and to operate their own systems of governance, as they did in the Northern Territory. And some time ago, back in the 70s, you see where magistrates there were asking the Commonwealth government to allow them to bring Aboriginal elders into the courtroom to help and advise the judge on making laws for Aboriginal people and passing sentences on Aboriginal people. And the magistrates in the Northern Territory were doing that in the 1970s. And so they wanted to, so now with the Mabo recognising Aboriginal law and custom, that means our law and customs are now recognised by the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth cannot change those laws. And the High Court said that they can't change any laws belonging to Aboriginal people because they're not a construct of the common law. They are laws that belong to this land, and they remain intact, and we now recognise those laws. So what we have is that we already have the recognition of Aboriginal laws and customs in this country, and we just have to get rid of the racist elements and make sure that, we can't have things like legislation in different states being rolled out against Aboriginal people's wishes, which impacts on their spiritual beliefs and their cultural beliefs. And this way we negate the ability of state and territory governments from destroying what's left of Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal beliefs within this lands, and it'll protect our sacred sites as well, which are sites of creation, and we need those things protected. But at present, we don't have any protection against that, and so the second option was 105A of the Australian Constitution was where the Commonwealth could take over the state debts, public debts, and pay them and take responsibility for them, and that they list a whole number of things that the Commonwealth could do under that power if the states couldn't pay their debts. So what we were saying was that we put in there Section 105B, and this is in relation to Aboriginal people, and you list everything that the Commonwealth could pass laws on. You might have a list of about 10 or 12 topical matters that focuses on different matters, and that would give the power to the Parliament to pass those type of laws. Now, the other aspect of this is that the people were saying, "Oh, that may be too lengthy for the public to understand, and we need to make it much more simple." And so we'd only just got into negotiating that when the Hawke government got in. And the Hawke government, of course, as we know, history shows that the Hawke government just shut down the whole process of treaty negotiations and treaty discussions at that time when he came into power. So the constitutional discussions have been going on for quite some time, and we have put proposals up. I've recently published some of that document on the Sovereign Union website, so you can have a look at that, what was there. We also put a land rights package up at that time as well, at the same time, because land rights was a key factor that was still very, very much at the forefront of people's minds. And so we put up a package on land rights as well. And so if you want to follow up on that, you'll see that in the Sovereign Union website, and you'll see see what we were talking about at that time. So we just wanted to I wanted to give you an insight into that, because what's going on now. We've travelled down this road. It was a rough road. We've gone down that road. And what they're talking about now is trying to reinvent the wheel when they haven't looked at what we've done in the past, which I find quite crazy, because you've got to learn from the past. You have to see where we've been, what we've done, what we have negotiated, because we've made a lot of inroads. There's a lot of things that have happened in Aboriginal affairs that have been for the better. And then, of course, because we have belligerent government who don't really want to deal with the real face of the Aboriginal issues, they tend to put their head in the sands and go ahead and try and pretend that no one else knows about what's gone on in the past. And unfortunately for a lot of our people and people who are working with them now, they still have never seen this stuff. They've never read it. And so, and there's some very good proposals amongst all of that. So I think, there's also an outline. I think Kevin Gilbert put up in 1988. Kevin Gilbert put up a proposed treaty, and within that he was following on a lot of what we did, and of course a lot of things around what he was talking about as well, in terms of what he'd been finding from Aboriginal people leading up to the 1988 celebrations. And so Kevin put out a booklet as well, on treaty as well. And so and that's sort of amalgamated some of the stuff that we were doing and some of the stuff that they were doing privately with Aboriginal communities in Australia. So there's and on the question of reconciliation and truth-telling, well, truth-telling basically means that you shouldn't be just focusing on the past. You should be talking on the present and telling the truth. And one of which is what really happened at Uluru. The Uluru statement is not a true reflection of what was being discussed at Uluru, and the fact that was really railroaded through against the wishes of the delegates who were elected by people to go to Uluru. The people who were elected at those regional conferences to go to Uluru never really got to present their case and their arguments and their proposals. It was controlled by the people who were nominated to run those and to host those conferences, those regional conferences, and those staff took control of the whole conference in Alice Springs. It's all recorded to see, for people to see what really went on. And unfortunately, unless you're there and unless you've got Aboriginal people telling you what really went on at that conference and sort of giving you a description of what was happening at the time, people would never understand. It would all look so rosy and comfortable and, oh yes, everybody seemed to be talking and everybody seemed to be agreeing. No, that was not the case. And of course, the sad thing is that, the images that they show of people dancing at Uluru and etc. The community, I have nieces and nephews that live at Uluru, at Murrayula, and their families just said that we don't even know what's going on here. What is all this about? What's going on? Because they handpicked just the council members who govern the Murrayula community, without telling the public, the rest of the people who lived there, a couple of hundred people, what was going on, because they had no idea. And a lot of those people never even got to attend the meeting at Uluru at the conference centre because they were not invited. And so it was pretty restricted to the ones that they wanted to come there. So it's a pretty unfair take when you look at what really happened there, and it's disappointing, and that's why there's a lot of objection and a lot of queries about what really went on. So the Uluru statement, whilst it may look rosy and prim and proper, the fact is that it establishes a much broader range of things, and unfortunately, the grassroots people really don't have an input. And our biggest concern about putting up an election for a voice, when you look at I've received some stuff from different senators now on what a couple of proposals are. And of course, one of them is that the voice will not be a publicly elected voice by the Aboriginal people, like we had with the ATSIC or with what we had with the National Aboriginal Conference from 1973. What we will have is a group of people who are hand-selected by key Aboriginal organisations that operates within different regions of Australia. And so they'll be the ones who will pick who they want to be on the council on this voice. So there's no public elections for the people to make their own choice. And this is an autocratic rule, and it cannot be accepted. And the people are fighting against this with all their might to say, well, hang on a minute, this is not what we want, because we don't support some of those key Aboriginal organisations that you're focusing on to select people. So the public has been mesmerised so much by this banter and all the goodwill that appears to be going on from the Labor Party. Underneath, there is a hidden horrible agenda that's going on that Aboriginal people are really not happy with. The other concern that we have is that if a referendum went ahead, then, you know, we Aboriginal people, we represent what, something 2.5% of the total Australian population. About 40%, if that, are on the electoral rolls, and I notice they're focusing on getting Aboriginal people on the electoral rolls these days. But still in all, you've got 28 million Australian people voting for a matter that Aboriginal people may not want. And so the majority, the tyranny of majority will destroy us. And it'll give an impression.
Michael?
Yeah.
I wonder, you said there a little earlier that you felt that the Uluru process railroaded people, people could not, some of the representatives who went there did not actually get to voice what they wanted. Would you be able to just fill in the sort of things that those people who you feel didn't get a voice there, what were some of the things that they would have pressed for or asked for or thought should be included in the statement if they'd had their opportunity?
Well, I know the two things was they wanted to discuss the whole question of the ongoing sovereignty of the people, because, you know, if you look at the Mabo judgment said that, you know, that, okay, Aboriginal people's law and customs are now recognised by the court, and it's not a construct of the common law. So what does that mean? So are we outside of that system of law, as Robert Menzies said in 1965? You take the word Aborigines out of the Constitution, then all of a sudden we have to make special laws for that race of people. That's what Robert Menzies said in 1965, leading up to the discussions on the 1967 referendum. And so he said that, you know, now we have a section of the Constitution which now facilitates making special laws for the Aboriginal race. So, and of course, Kim Beazley Senior said in that same parliamentary debate in 1965 that Aboriginal people were not citizens of this country, and so we were a foreign race. Now, it wasn't until 2021 when the High Court of Australia ruled by majority that Aboriginal people were neither citizens nor aliens, and so that's a ruling from the High Court of Australia. And so Aboriginal people who were there, the grassroots people who were there, wanted this question fleshed out and wanted it asked so that we can put that to the government to say, we need to talk about this before we go any further, and let's sort this out. Then the other point that also was that the Aboriginal people in Mabo decision, the Mabo decision said that the Aborigines were neither conquered nor did we acquiesce by way of cession, ceding our independence to the sovereigns who came, and so the squatters and the colonialists. And so the Mabo judgment, the full bench of the High Court said Aborigines did not cede nor relinquish cede or were conquered. And so that means then, what does that leave Aboriginal people within the legal system of this country? And so those questions are yet to be dealt with. And that's they're two of the key things that the people wanted raised at the convention at Uluru, but never got an opportunity to be able to discuss this and flesh them out. And so it was, put up as what we read now as the statement from the heart. And so, it's not a true reflection of what people wanted to discuss there. Does that satisfy your query?
Yeah, no, that was good. Okay, thank you. Yep.
Okay. So where I left off was that so the people, our people now don't want to have a referendum put up in this country where 28 people versus 2% of the population will outvote us whether we want it or not. And so our problem is that then gives the world a total misunderstanding of the fact that the Aborigines consented to this constitutional reform and being included in this so-called voice, which is going to be an autocratic rule, and so that falsehood takes away our independence. So it's taken everything away from us. And our idea is that, first of all, we should have a referendum amongst Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people first, to find out if we want this to go ahead. But we're not being offered that opportunity properly on a mass scale, so that we can ask our people what they want. That Uluru statement is not none of what we're talking about now was raised at the Uluru conference. It was not discussed, and there was no open forum where opposition could be heard and the pros voices could be heard. So there was no proper discussion on this, and that becomes a real issue. So quite frankly, I would like to see us have more dialogue with people like yourselves and other larger groups to explain our position, so that we understand. We don't want this goodwill to be lost. Let's put it that way. Yeah? And I think there's a lot of goodwill there, and that's something we don't want to lose. But we don't want to sort of find ourselves, with the Bolts, for example, on TV, and others who are the far right wing people. We don't want them to sort of hijack this whole process and turn it into something that it's really not. And so we stand to lose a lot. Our future generations stand to lose so much if this whole thing is railroaded and pushed through without our consent. And that's our greatest fear, is that we will become assimilated with one brush, and that disturbs us quite significantly. So I'll leave it for questions.
Okay, perhaps I'll continue on what you've said there. I just asked if you would actually speak about this and clarify it. The voice is a process by which the voice of Indigenous people, First Nations people, will actually be heard a little more loudly in Canberra. How the things that you were saying were left out of this process, given that this was originally a reconciliation process and now it's become about the voice. Do you see that there will be those other processes that you said that people wanted about regarding sovereignty and the clarification of sovereignty, and the fact that in a way, maybe you could put it that they're almost like two sovereignties, both in place over the same land in a way and the same peoples. So they're the sort of issues you're saying are essential to be resolved in as quickly as possible. And also you talked about the work that's already been done on treaty, which to some extent has been left aside and not brought back to the fore. So to the extent that this referendum is principally about actually just establishing the voice, to what extent do you see that will actually detract from the other key issues that you've raised here? particularly to do with treaty and to do with resolution of issues around sovereignty?
Well, I really cannot make any commentaries on that because, quite frankly, I haven't seen any wording being proposed yet. But what we're hearing is not what we want. You know, and again, I'm making commentaries about what I've seen and heard in the public arena to date, and so without the details being presented, and considering they're wanting to push this thing through in 2023, as from my point of view, I think that's very dangerous because we're not going to see that detail and have an opportunity to discuss those details, and it's left then to a hand-picked group of people that the minister and the prime minister puts together, and the rest of the Aboriginal community is left out of that dialogue and don't have an opportunity to have a say. That's why I'm saying we should have a referendum in 2023 after they put something up and put up what they're proposing, so that we all understand what it is, and we have an opportunity to investigate that in our own minds and with our own legal and political advisors, to say, well, how will this impact on us? And we haven't seen any of that yet, and we want an opportunity to be able to discuss that with our people. Like one thing that we got to understand is that we have 300 language groups in this country. Yeah, we have lands in this country that is owned by different nations. We have different languages, and so you cannot put, you know, develop it one size shoe fit all of us. No, we have different priorities. We have different understandings of our own world. We don't go across into someone else's land. Like I would never dare go to the Murrawari across the other side of my river at the back of my house and tell them what they should be saying and what they should be thinking, and they should have the same things we want. No, you know, you would never do this. You would never get away with this in any other country or any other place in the world, because we are different tribes, we are different people. Yeah, we have a songline that's one of the most unique things to the world that we have, and that is that we have a spiritual and cultural belief that runs right across this country. But our storylines show us that the creators created people within their own country. So when you read the Bible, you have a look and you look at where they talk about you know, the boundary stones of the different mobs, of the different language groups, of the different people, and that no man on earth has a right to interfere with those boundary stones. And so, you know, these are the biblical texts. And so here, none of that matters. None of that appears to matter when it comes to Aboriginal people. And this is so wrong, to try and say that we all think the same in this country. No, we don't. And we make our own decisions about ourselves, and we reserve those rights to do so.
We have a question here in the chat regarding the statement you made about neither citizens nor aliens, not conquered or nor ceded. Could you just speak about that a little more, and talk about how what that throws up and how issues around that might be dealt with going forward?
But first of all, let me address what Mabo said. So we'll sort of try and stay chronological order, date way. So 1992, when the Mabo decision came down, in the Mabo judgment, they said that Aboriginal people were neither conquered people, nor did we cede our sovereignty and our laws to Great Britain, nor did we acquiesce. And so as a consequence of that, that means that we are still separate, because you see, we were never made denizens of the king when they first arrived in Australia. The king did not come here. Now, the legal interpretation of land in that respect, everybody that I've spoken to around the world about land and land titles, the reason the Australian government and community went mad and all this uncertainty emerged, the uncertainty emerged in this country after Mabo simply because of the fact that that they realised after Mabo that you see the Crown did not have possessory title. The King, when they came here, the King never ever came to Australia and claimed the country in his name. He did that by proxy, by colonialists setting up country. And so the King has never ever had possessory title to this country. And so all legal eagles around the world tell you this. And so we only have in this country registered land titles as a consequence of a logbook being bought off a ship and then an office being established on the mainland of Australia, and they set that up as a land registry office. So the surveys were then registered. So that what gives them what they call radical title, but they do not have beneficial radical title because Aboriginal people are still in occupation of their lands, which is adverse to the Crown's interest. And Mabo says that as well. And so the Crown did not. Now, John Howard, when he did the 10-point plan, he did it on the basis that of these points, that Australia lands were not held by possessory title by the Crown. They were only a registered title in a land registry office. And so, so John Howard changed the laws a little bit so that Mabo said in their decision that Aboriginal people's interest in land could be extinguished by a valid act. Now, they never described what a valid act was, but John Howard then cleverly wrote into the Native Title Act in 1998, the amendments where they do an Indigenous land use agreement, and within that Indigenous land use agreement, there are three clauses in there in a land use agreement where they say that basically they recognise the extinguishment of their interest. Secondly, that future acts are to be classified as past acts, so that denies future generations of Aboriginal people from ever having the right to negotiate on country that they consider their own. And the other part to this is that when native title has been granted in Australia now, no Aboriginal, so let's say my mob, the Ualiai, you have native title in Queensland. When we went to the Land Registry Office in Queensland, after that decision, now 12 months, going on 12 months, we find that our names are not on the land titles. Those lands are now classified as unused state lands. They are not in our name. And when you look at Aboriginal people who've got native title all over this country, not one of those nations have their name on the land registry. It's all classified as unused state land, going right back to when the first land native title was determined. So Aboriginal people still don't own their land. It's all still owned by the Crown. And even though they give you a piece of paper saying that you are now recognised as a traditional owners of this land, but our names are not registered on the land registry in any state or territory in this country. So that's one point. In terms of the other thing that came out of Mabo was the fact that we were not beneficial. So John Howard was advised by the Sir Samuel Griffith Society of Lawyers, who told John Howard not to claim the minerals in the name of the states or the Commonwealth. Because if that was the case, Aboriginal arguments winning any sovereign debate would then mean that the Crown would have to repay to the Aboriginal people all the money that's ever been earned and paid, all those royalties paid to state governments would have to be repaid back to the Aboriginal people. And that would send this country broke, every state and territory and the federal government. They would never be able to pay that bill. So there are some key factors here that have to be looked at. On the next point, which was the citizens, neither citizens nor aliens, if you have a look at the 2021 decision, February 2021 decision of Tom and Love case in the High Court of Australia, that's where the High Court of Australia investigated the status of Aboriginal, citizenship status of Aboriginal people. And that's where they determined that given everything they looked at in terms of the laws since federation, since colonisation and federation, there is no law there, and there is no way in the world in which they could acquire the citizenship of Aboriginal people, the patrimony of Aboriginal people, unless we give over ourselves to them. And therefore, that's why they say that Aboriginal people of Aboriginal ancestry, are neither citizens nor aliens, because we've never had that citizenship status ever bestowed upon us by the Crown, and that had to be done by way of accession, by us acceding to them or ceding to them, and or them conquering us, and that never happened, as the High Courts have said.
Okay, thank you, Michael, on that one. There's a few questions come in here, so I'll go to the next one. The second one, the next question actually is, I'll just read it out. Would not a singular voice be the way forward necessary to negotiate with a single Commonwealth?
Well, we can negotiate with a single Commonwealth, because the Commonwealth government, as Malcolm Fraser said, the federal executive government of Australia are the elected ones that represent the Commonwealth of Australia. But Aborigines are not part of that Commonwealth, and therefore you're negotiating with different tribes, you're negotiating with different people. And as the High Court said, we are neither citizens nor aliens. So you're dealing with a foreign group of people. Now, we've been living together here for almost 230 something years, and we're still very estranged from each other. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And until people realise this and accept that as a fact, then we'll have somewhere to start. Right now, it's just turning a blind eye. Typical Aussies. Oh, she'll be right, mate. You know, we just go down the road. You know, the black fellas will fall in line. We're the majority. No, it's not going to happen like that, because it will be embarrassing for the government to realise that they're going to have a lot of Aboriginal opposition to any voice to Parliament in a constitutional change. That will be very embarrassing.
Okay. The next question.
It'll confuse the public as well.
Okay. So the next question goes to, you mentioned perhaps that Indigenous people should choose first what kind of content a referendum should have, what kind of questions are being asked. And then that referendum should perhaps go to the broader Australian population. So the question goes, it's unlikely that complete consensus would ever be achieved on voice or sovereignty amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. If a referendum was held amongst First Nations people alone, is there a risk that differing views could not be reconciled, and even a majority would still leave many First Nations people alienated? What other ways forward are there?
No, the Aboriginal people will be alienated if we allow Aboriginal organisations to be nominated as the ones to select who should be the speakers for Aboriginal people. And the other thing is that we have the right, we reserve the right to represent ourselves as individual nations, as different linguistical groups. You know, you can't have the Greeks making decisions for the Italians. Yeah, you can't have the British making decisions for the French, and so you can't have the people at the Yolngu making decisions for the Wiradjuri. You can't have decisions made by the Pinjarra people, Yankara people for the Ualia in New South Wales. You can't have the different tribes making decisions for other tribes. We all reserve the right to be respected for who we are and what we are, and like this would never happen in the United States. You'd never dream about doing this in the United States or Canada, because the tribes would eat you to death. They would cannibalize you. Yeah, and here we're expected to sort of nod our heads and say, "Yeah, she'd be all right, mate." No way in the world. That's not going to happen.
Michael, can I just ask, maybe just sticking with that same idea, like a clarification? The voice is not really a decision-making body. The voice is meant to take to the Parliament of Australia, the concerns and issues that Indigenous people want to raise. Is given there are, as you say, a number of different, I don't know how many nationalities are recognised amongst Indigenous people, but I know there's quite a lot. Given that large number of people are there, given that very large number of people will have different concerns, as you've just pointed out. So what kind of way can a voice be constructed so that it will be ensured that one group is not actually leaving out the voice of another, and yet you can still have a voice to the parliament?
No, I think what needs to be, I think we need to get rid of the thought of a voice. That's the starting point. Get rid of that thought. What has to be done here is that we have to go to the nations and negotiate with the nations, and so it's the individual nations, linguistical groups within a defined land mass. They should have the right to make their own decisions about their own welfare and their own future. And so that could be by way of a deed of settlement, comprehensive settlement, as they've done in New Zealand and in some other places in the world, or you can do it by way of a treaty. But the treaty also cannot be one way, and that is, like, state treaties are restricted to what's written in their constitution. So you can't negotiate with New South Wales, for example, outside of what's written in their constitution. So if we want to go beyond that, we have to talk with the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth will then have to override the state in respect to matters that Aboriginal people may want to go further on and negotiate further. So, like I'm saying, there's so much more to be discussed here before we even get anywhere near contemplating establishing a set of words or a paragraph or a page of what they think should be put in the Constitution. This is not just about a voice. This is about people. Yes, you're talking about the possibility that we get a voice that may be able to sort of advise on policy issues. But you see, the tendency here will permit the federal government to accept that recommendation as if it's representing all Aboriginal people saying the same thing. No, that's not going to be the case. We've elected in the past. We've had national elections where we've elected 36 people from different regions. So there were regions where they were culminated in a finding that these 36 regions had connections linguistically and ceremonially to each other. And so those tribes were made up of a region. And so that we developed, there was 42, but the Whitlam government agreed to 36. So we had to cut that back down. So if you develop a 42 regional area in Australia, then those 42 would then be able to vote themselves who they want to speak for them in Canberra. But the thing is that we don't want this to be a puppet organisation. Like, you know, we've had, since 1973, we've had elected bodies from around this country to advise government on policies. We have had that. We've done it. We've been doing it for a long time. And so we don't want a puppet organisations or a showpiece for the world to see that Australia is trying to do something. No, if you're going to do it right. The complication, as Malcolm Fraser said to us in a meeting, the complication is that the Commonwealth and the states don't want to deal with all the individual nations. Now, unfortunately, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to, because you're going to get a lot of opposition, and that's going to be a trouble here, because we've had these discussions for a long time now, and we need to understand that each nation reserves the right to represent themselves. That's the key point here.
Okay, there's a few questions here, but maybe maybe I can kind of go to this. I could just read them out, but yeah. I'll try one more time first. There are a number of different things here. There's like treaty, which is obviously what you're involved with for a long time, which is still yet to be done. And I hear you saying some things about treaty here and the way that treaty we can't have, I think, this is my attempt to clarify, you're saying we can't have one treaty, we can't have one process because there are all these different groups. And you're saying also that you would see that, so the idea, maybe if you could start by speaking a little more about this idea of region. So are you saying that there is a possibility that, so you're part of the ULA group, what region are you part of? What other sort of member nations are there of that region? And is there a possibility that you would see that you could actually work with those other groups that you're close to sort of, you know, I suppose, elect one representative or to have one group of people represent you? Is that the sort of way that a practical way forward could be?
Well, yes and no. We've gone down this pathway with the National Aboriginal Conference and ATSIC in the past, and the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee from 1973. The problem that we still have is that it's possible, but when you start saying, when I start saying, okay, I can join a regional area with different tribes around me, which is most of the northern part of New South Wales to the Warrego River, I guess, and down to the Macquarie and Bogan River in the northern sector, with the Ngimba, Whalewin, Ngayampa, Murrawari, Gomeroi, and Ualiai. That takes up a very big proportion of New South Wales, and so that area there, we would talk to each other in council, but but each person would want their own. Each nation would want their own representative, and they would not agree to a single treaty that covers that region. There's no way in the world that would happen. And these are the complications and the realities that people really have to focus on, is the reality of our existence as we are and as we have been since prior to and since colonisation. I know it's frustrating. It's frustrating for us to try and deal with this, but you know, for you guys to understand the complexities associated with tribal, with nations and their laws and how they interact with each other, that's never been discussed, never been dealt with. I've dealt with it in private committees in 1973 with the government, and you know, I can only repeat what they say, and that is that they say, how in the world do we deal with that? And the question is, you have to take time and work it out. And only the people can work this out, no foreigners.
Okay. I'll just take a second now to say, we've been going for about an hour and a quarter. Are you happy to go a little bit longer?
Yeah, if there's some questions, yes.
Well, I'll double back to that one because there's a question about ATSIC. We'll leave it and then come back to it, I think. But so this one takes us in a little bit of a different direction. Do you see a continuing role for the Tent Embassy?
The Aboriginal Embassy's silence is very damaging. Its existence reminds the Australian people that there is a problem, and it's a big problem. And it's not just an eyesore, but its silence is deafening, and the politicians have got no idea how to deal with it.
Right. Okay. So in that regard, or given that reality, what do you see, perhaps just in the near future, the role for the Tent Embassy can be, or something, or what can it, in a way, change into to have a continuing role?
Well, the embassy, I think the embassy will always be there while ever we have these differences that we're talking about and how to deal with the problem. I think the embassy represents a lot of that, and the Aboriginal Embassy represents the fact that you know, there's, you know, you can't say one group represents all of the Aboriginal people and expresses the wishes of everyone. You know, The embassy has stood for the fact that sovereignty was never ceded and the fact that we want our land back. Now, I remember Commissioner Gibson, the Commissioner of Police in the ACT at the time, when he came up to us about 6 a.m. in the morning, when we put that embassy up, he said to us, how long do you guys intend to stay here? And my brother, colleague, Billy Craigie, said to him, we'll be here until we get land rights. And he said, that might be a long time. Well, it's still there, isn't it? It's 50 years.
Yeah.
That's it's something that that will remain, I think, an eyesore for Australia, because it's the eyesore that they feel is simply that it's the pain that we feel of not being able to come to a conclusion and have people talk to us properly.
Okay, good. I'll just double back now to ATSIC, if we may. ATSIC was an elected body, which was, in the end was actually finished. Can you tell us, in a bit of a kind of a summary, what the valuable things about ATSIC were, and the things about it that maybe were problematic, if you just, like, its pros and cons and what it did achieve?
Let me start with this by saying that it's quite ironic that in 1973, when the first National Aboriginal Consultative Committee were elected, it was after about 12 months, the caucus of that body, with a resolution from the full assembly, passed a resolution to ask the federal government to transfer the operations of the Department of Aboriginal Affairs to that particular organisation, to the National Aboriginal Conference and the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee. And because the National Aboriginal Consultative Committee felt that as an organisation, they were service delivering to our people, and therefore we should be managing and we should be telling them the priorities as an elected group of people, because we set the agenda. And if the government's given them money, well, then we'll set the priorities for them to expend that on in delivering services to the Aboriginal community, addressing the gap that we talk about. Now, all of a sudden, a bloke by the name of Senator Jim Kavanagh, the late Senator Jim Kavanagh, came to the meeting, because I was asked to come to that meeting. I wasn't working for him at that time, in Canberra. And Jim Kavanagh came in because this was all over the news, that Aborigines wanted to take control of the Department of Aboriginal Affairs. And Jim Kavanagh came in and told the people emphatically that the Department of Aboriginal Affairs was not an Aboriginal institution or an Aboriginal organisation. It was a government instrumentality, and it was a department that belonged to the Parliament. Now, then in when ATSIC came into existence, they then folded all the organisations into, like, the Aboriginal Development Commission, which was an economic arm of government to develop buy land as well as to establish business enterprises for Aboriginal people and get them into the mainstream economy. You had the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, which was doing their bidding with for and on behalf of the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. And then, of course, you had this elected body that they put together. So they amalgamated all of those things. But one thing that they never ever told the elected Aboriginal people was that the ATSIC body, there were two parts to it. One was the elected body, the Aboriginal people, and then the second part to it was its administrative operations. But they never told the elected people that the administrative arm of that organisation was still a government body and of people. And so when ATSIC commissioners wanted to take responsibility and press, those public servants started withdrawing and saying no, and they didn't want to act on the advice of of the commission. And so we ended up with a confrontation between the elected people and the administrators of that organisation. And so then when the minister stepped in and then closed down ATSIC, they shut down the advisory body and then swallowed up and recalled all the people who were working for ATSIC because they were public servants, and then they went back in and they got shepherded off into other agencies within the Commonwealth government. They never lost their jobs because they were public servants. And so there was this division and there was this belief that the staff of ATSIC worked for them. No, they got a rude shock when the staff decided we're not going to work for you and we're not carrying out the policies that you want us to carry out.
Okay,
and then that's where it fell apart.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Just one question: the way that ATSIC were elected, was that a system which was consistent with the kind of concerns and things you've expressed already? Was it actually a good process of election?
Yeah, I sat on that committee to establish the first 1993 one with Charles Perkins and other people like John Moriarty, and we had a body of people. Lois O'Donnell was included in that. And when we did it, we said, no, this has got to be free elections, and so the people can choose who they want. And so you had a list of people, just like the House of Representatives, just like the Parliament. And so the person so it was a first past the post voting system. We engaged at that time the Commonwealth Electoral Office Commissioner, who came and worked with us on that committee, and we designed an electoral process, and it was all run through the Commonwealth Electoral Office. We went out there and we established in 6 months. In 6 months we got 67,000 people on an Aboriginal electoral roll throughout the country. The government was quite shocked that we got so many people in such a short time, but we left it open for Aboriginal people within those communities to have a right to come in, register their names on the roll, and be able to get a right to vote at the electoral office, at the electoral booth, on the day of the election. And so we did that, and I think it ended up with about 75,000 Aboriginal people around this country on that Aboriginal electoral roll. And like I say, the government panicked because they realised that, okay, if we look at the marginal seats in this country, in Australia, particularly the rural and remote areas, you find all of a sudden we've got this electoral roll that we're Aboriginal people. These people are not on the Commonwealth electoral roll. And that frightened the living daylights out of a lot of those politicians who are sitting in these marginal seat areas. So that shocked them. And then they stopped that electoral roll, and they stopped anybody from getting on that electoral roll again, and they shut it down very quickly. And of course, the rest is history.
But the process that was initiated by yourselves, you feel that was a process that would lead to a truly representative group who could speak, for and that was a workable way of electing representatives?
Well, some of the older ones had said that that was the best way, first past the post principle, as opposed to preferential voting, because they said, this is the person that the people wanted most, rather than putting someone so that instead of the majority vote, then all of a sudden you stack up the other votes against that person. You get someone who's not necessarily the one that they wanted.
Like the Senate.
Yeah, and so that's the way we approached it. We said, no, we'll have a first past the post winner here, and because that's the person that the majority wants.
Okay. So one, I'll just work. Okay, thank you. One question, then I'll just ask you to say, the Australian government is a commonwealth of states who are themselves sovereign governments in a way. So we have these different levels of sovereignty, and then you have council governments as well. Is something which had a voting system, something like ATSIC, capable of bringing together all of the different nations within the First Nations people, so that you can have like if you like, a commonwealth of Indigenous nations. Is that kind of idea something that is a possibility or something worth working towards?
It is
not worrying too much about what they do.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's have a look at the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives consists of over 400 people. Yeah. So to run an election for Aboriginal people and have the nations represent themselves, you would have about 310 nations. So you would have 300 and something people. But at the same time, if you then design it like the American Congress, where everybody has a right to speak, and they choose who who shall chair the meetings and so on. That's their right, but at least everybody gets a voice, and and we don't want to be put into a situation, where this may not work. It can work. The other thing that we've looked at as well, and we investigated, is that we must have within Aboriginal society, we must pay due respects to the fact that we have women business and we have men business. And Aboriginal people understand that we must respect our women and the women's right to make decisions for women. And so we come together as a collective in this regard, and we are guided by the women who are the nurturers of our society, and therefore we must have cognizance of their interests as well, and they must be represented. And so there has to be a second chamber, which consists of women. And I know, for example, I've been at a lot of meetings out there where patriarchy reigns in the desert areas, and but I've been in some of those meetings where the elder women sit out on their own a little bit in the meeting at the back of the men, and they always have little sticks or little stones. And so if they don't like what the men are saying, you see a little stone been thrown at the man who's doing the talking, just to remind him that I'm sitting behind you, you're going to deal with me later. So I've seen that in action, and I've noticed men sort of shut their mouths pretty quickly in those meetings. So it's, we have a way of making decisions, and I think that's something that has to be written into a charter to make sure that those voices are heard as well.
Okay.
We don't want this, we don't want someone sort of telling us that we must have one chamber for women, one chamber for men. Let us design the way in which we want to do this, because I know the women actually have a lot to say, and our men take a lot of notice, because after all, those ladies actually nurture the children. Not only do that, they also cook the feeds.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for your time and all of these things. I think we've given us all a lot to think about, and in some ways you've opened up the discussion and shown more things. So I think at this point in time, I think we've done a reasonable job of bringing up the issues raised in the questions. If someone wants to rush in a final one saying, no, you left me out, I'm happy to consider that. But I'd be happy at this point in time, Michael, if you could just make some closing remarks, perhaps just clearly identifying. I know you said I'm not expecting you to say something new than what you've said already, but rather just to put as in a summary form, really, what you see as the major priorities now and the major benefit that come from getting this right.
Well, quite frankly, I think I cannot emphasize enough when I say that every nation has a right to their own voice, and that they have a decision-making process that has to be respected, and that those people voices cannot be disregarded in any way. Sure, within each of our nations, we all have differing opinions, and part of the problem where the confrontation is in the political savagery and the cannibalization of each other on Facebook, Twitter, and other social platforms is because we're all being thrown into one big basket, and we're being churned around as if, we all got to take notice and we all got to listen to one person or listen to a group of people. No, we've been down this road, we've investigated it, and we understand. And I'm watching right now what's going on, and we've been thrown into a big barrel, and quite frankly, the wall around us is so great that we are cannibalizing each other over something that should be very simple. And it's simple from our point of view. Let the nations represent themselves. Do not develop a national platform where the selected few have the say. This is so wrong. It would never happen. You would never be able to get the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church and the Protestants to come together in one forum and all be able to eat the same mixed meal that is cooked up for them in politics or any other way. And I don't think that, I think people need to respect this, the fact that we have our own individual identities, and we need to maintain that individual identity and reserve the right to be the people that we are and not be molded into something that someone else wants us to be.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all that you've brought forward.